You good? Yep. So as she said, I'm Jane Dargetts. I'm the secretary for North Grove School Association. And I gave you a handout, which is, I was a teacher, so that's kiss of death. Now I won't have your attention. But just a snippet of information about the school. It was built in 1878 by the Swedish Lutheran Church, which is now known as Salem Lutheran. And it was built to be used for Sunday school, used to be eventually, they had school out there from 1878 all the way to 1952. And they taught school in Swedish. So all the kids that came were taught in Swedish for at least through 1880. And then they kind of combined it with English as well. What was interesting about that is we had a family that after the Civil War, the Henry Beard family attended our school. He had 14 children. He happened to be Black. He was working in the Civil War with a local infantryman. He had been a cook, and the guy said, come to Sycamore. He got some land there, and he was a farmer, raised his family there. So here's this family when all this turmoil is going on in the US, and I do a lot of tours with little children, and I say, there was a lot of going on where they were like, no, we don't want Black children in our schools. They shouldn't be educated. And here in our town, we had a family that we were more than happy to welcome into our school and educate. And here are these Black children speaking Swedish, which seems kind of counterintuitive. So this is, and I've been corrected, so I'm not exactly sure, but the only school I'm sure in DeKalb County that is on its original site being used as its original purpose. And as I'm driving the back roads from Sycamore up here, I'm like, I'm gonna pass a one-room school. And sure enough, on Pleasant Hill Road, I passed a one-room school in not good condition, because a lot of them are either museums or they're in disrepair or they're homes or whatever. Ours has always been, it's had its periods where it was not being as well taken care of because it takes a lot of funding and a lot of work to keep it in good condition. For example, we just had a capital campaign where we raised money to have our windows preserved by a firm out of Rockford that does that kind of preservation where you use the proper glass, you use the proper techniques. So all of our windows, to a hefty tune of about $37,000, were restored to their original functioning because they were all painted shut. They didn't work. Now they do. So you're all in the same business we are, not for profit, trying to preserve historical things. And that's what we're doing. That's what the North Grove School Association does. But our purpose is to keep it the way it was so that children and families and community members can come and visit and see what life in a one-room school was like. So you've got the history there on your handout, but what we do today is we're open for people to come and visit, and that could be anytime. Are we open on a regular basis? No, we're not. But on our website, there's a way that you can contact us and bring your family. I'm usually the docent that will take you through a tour and explain things. But what we mostly do is we have school tours. So I will go out and I will meet with the group that's going to come out, and I'll do a PowerPoint and I'll explain, give them some background and walk them through. And some of the favorite things you've got on the back pictures of a group that's come, and some of them walk. Our group from North School, they walk from North School. They get the county police officers to get them safely across Peace Road, but they walk all the way from North School all the way to North Grove one-room school, and they're like, this is a long way. And you would have been getting up at 6 a.m. to do your chores around the farm and then walk all that way, no matter what the weather was. Nobody's dropping you off in a nice warm car. And then you would be outside waiting until it was time to go. I mean, the life in a one-room school, so different. And the kids spend, especially from North School different groups come for a different amount of time. But then because the school is so small, we have stations. So there are 3 groups outside and 1 group inside. And different schools do it different ways. I'm often the person inside. So I'm walking them through segments of what a day would be like in 20 to 30 minutes. We have a sampling of what reading would be like, a sampling of what math would be like, a sampling of what memory work would be like, so that they can see what it would be like to be. And they're looking around at this room that's about this size actually, and seeing all the littles would be by the windows so that they would have the best light. Most one-room schools would have the littles up front because they didn't need a desk because they weren't writing yet. They were learning by recitation. Recitation, we don't know what that is. So we learn about what recitation is. But in our school, they would be by the windows because that's where the best light was. So they could learn how to do the writing and things like that. And they see the graduated size of the desks from small up to large. And they learn how the older kids helped work with the younger kids, how everybody in that room becomes a teacher at some point. They learn how this was the social place for the entire community. That 36 square mile area, that whether you had kids or not, you came to those social events. There were several of them a year. There was always the Christmas program. There was Arbor Day. There was the 8th grade graduation. There were those things that, and then there were potlucks, and there were sewing days during wartime when they were making things for the troops. It was the central part of social life. So we talk about all of that, and there's so many things, and their favorite part, and there's one picture I think here where there's a little boy sticking his nose in the center of a circle on the board. There's a dictionary there that's huge, probably stands about this tall closed, where one of the punishments was the teacher would make them stand there for as long as she wanted if he'd done something wrong. And they used a lot of what we wouldn't do today in schools, humiliation. And they want to know all about those punishments. And some of the punishments were you just had to stay after school. Well, when your siblings got home and you weren't there, mom's already tipped off because mom's home because she's doing stuff around the farm. They're already tipped off that you're in trouble. If you got in trouble at school, the punishments was triple, double, whatever, and extra chores, and it was humiliating because they're sending you to school to learn, especially they've come from Sweden for a better life here in America. So all of those things are things that we teach, and we spend a lot of time. A lot of what we do is educating younger people here in our communities. And it's not just Sycamore. We've had schools come from DeKalb and Kirkland, and we were trying to reach out to the homeschool. We've had some homeschool groups come. We've had just individuals from the community come. They see on our website that they can contact us and come for a tour. So I've had older people come. I've had Oakcrest come. So it's wonderful to open it. That's what our purpose is to reach out and be open to the community. Otherwise, we've got other events. There are 3 that we do every year. The summer days is one of our biggest ones, and we're going to do it this summer. So that's the end of June. I think it's the 25th and 26th this year, and that's already on the docket. And I listed some of the things that we do. We have a petting zoo. We have just old time things like the ice cream social, hot dogs that maybe hot dogs weren't 1878, but they were kind of, 1950s. Yes, we would have done that. Cookies, ice cream social, like I said, old time games, some of the games that they would have played, they didn't have a lot of equipment, but we got that huge slide. If you've ever been there, the kids are like, this is really tall. Yeah, it is. And you know what wax paper does to a slide? That's really fun. Just some little stations that they can do. We have a wood carver come. We have somebody come with alpacas. We have the FFA come with their animals. So it's great, and it's a 2-day event. And usually the weather cooperates. We love when it does, because again, we can't use the inside space. It's rather crowded. We do use it. We do tours and things. Then we always have an open house the Saturday of Pumpkin Fest. And then we have our old fashioned Christmas the Saturday after Thanksgiving. The house is decked out. We have usually Jen Parsons is our president, and she's a 5th grade teacher at North. So she finds one of her 5th graders who will don the Santa Lucia. And so she's walking around. We usually have homemade cookies, because 2 of our board members attended our school. And so it's wonderful to have their authentic memories. We have many memoirs of people who actually attended that I've written activities for the kids to do when they either before or after that are part of our teacher resources that are on the website. And so those memoirs become part of what they can do before and after, and they're from authentic sources, and we talk about primary sources. So I mean, there's so many rich activities from real attendees. So our purpose is to make it come alive, even though it's 143 going on 144 years old. So school field trips, the community events, and just being able to reach out to the community. What's in the future? Continuing to preserve the school is our biggest thing. We've done the windows. We've got some woodworking that we need to do. There's some beautiful cornices that are on the building that need to be done. We have contracted that same preservation firm that's going to be working for us this spring and summer whenever we fit on his docket. And you need to book that out 9-10 months in advance. And we've got some paint that needs to be done, because that wood is old, and so it needs to be treated just right before new paint is applied. But big picture, and I'm talking very long term, we would love to have a building kind of like you have now. You had your little museum, but now you've got some meeting space and some exhibition space. We don't necessarily need the exhibition space, but to have the meeting space where we could have a whole group come in at a time, where we can meet with them, or the kids could eat lunches there. They eat outside. So very often, the first trip we had on the docket this year got canceled. It was cold and rainy. So hopefully they can come in the spring. Somewhere, and with bathrooms, we have the legit outhouses from the day, but we also always have a porta potty. So if we could have a facility, and this is the dream world, if we could have a facility where we could have our groups come and have a place to meet as a whole group, probably still have their stations, but have a place where maybe 2 classes could come at a time and have one large meeting space, that would be ideal. But that you're talking land, you're talking a building, I mean, that's big dream world. So that's another whole capital campaign. And right now we just need to preserve the building, and that's big future. So it's very exciting. And to see the kids' faces, and as they leave, they're thanking me and they're saying, "This was the best day of school ever. I wish I could." And I'm like, as a former teacher, yeah, I would like to teach here too, especially to have the parents' support and to have all that cooperation. And as I was doing the research to be a docent, I thought, look at the educational buzzwords that are floating around now. They're not that much different. Let the kids run if they're capable, because if you have a 2nd grader that's capable of doing more math, well, then they could have been in the 3rd grade group or the 4th grade group. Or if they need a little more work on that concept, they could be working with the 1st grade. I mean, we were doing it 100 years ago. So it was very interesting to see they were already doing it. And that cooperation and the whole community support, it's super exciting. Any questions?
How many members do you have?
Ooh, good question. I don't know, a lot. We have a lot of members, and their membership is like $20 a year. But I I don't actually know. I could look it up on it. We have a big spreadsheet, but I'm not the spreadsheet lady.
And how many board members do you have?
We have about, I think it's 8 or 9. Maybe it's 7 or 6. Good
And
question.
so then how many people really work to help bring about the special activities that you do?
Probably around 9 or 10. Mhm.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. Yeah. And then their spouses and their family members are voluntold. Yeah. Yeah, it pulls together every time. And although we gained a couple of volunteers just by them going on the website and then coming to visit. And one of them started attending meetings and she emailed me, she said, I was very informative meetings, really enjoyed that, but I really just want to volunteer. I'm like, great. So, if she would come on as a docent or something, that'd be wonderful, or just helping at the events that's what's really helpful. So, yeah. Well, tell your friends, because we loved it when people come and visit.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I didn't know where mine went. I had mine, but those
Well, thank you. I know that you guys have worked so hard and it's just been able to see just the evolution of getting more kids out there. And I know I've heard some kids that there's some rules for what they can bring for lunch. It can't be, it all has to be like in a knapsack and, when you do that.
We have them wrap it in wax paper. Remember your lunches in wax paper? And some of the kids, as you can see from those pictures, really tried to dress the part. And
yeah, that's so fun. Wonderful. Well, thank you for all your work.
sure.
So now for our host today, we're going to start, looks like, with Cynthia. Are you our first person up? So with the Kishwaukee Valley Heritage Society, and they are also one of the stops here on the history of DeKalb County and 100 objects. We highlight the story of the building that we're in here today and next door. So we're going to learn about that as well as some of their current exhibits and future plans. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Cynthia. Thank you.
Well, today I want to give you a little background on how Kishwaukee Valley Heritage started. A group of 15 Genoa citizens met February 6, 1977.
Can you stand in front of the computer so we can?
Oh,
Yep. So
Okay.
record you better. Thank you.
should I start over?
No, you're good. You still got this.
Okay. So anyway, a group of 15 local citizens met and they decided that evening that their purpose was to provide cultural, historical, and educational benefits to the community. And their major function was to discover and collect materials which may help to establish and illustrate the history of our community. So Bob Hoover was a local fellow who was very instrumental in the organization. He had been collecting historical documents and materials for years, and his goal was to start a museum. So he gathered these 15 people together, and that evening they decided that their short-range project would be to for the acquisition and renovation of the Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad Depot. And that depot was located on North Sycamore Street. It was scheduled for demolition at the time, and they were concerned that if that depot was lost, the history and background of Genoa would be lost. So they arranged for the purchase of the depot for $1. And then, of course, the big plan, the big project was to actually move the depot from North Sycamore Street to this location. And they, Bob Hoover and Merle Roberts, another member of the group, made a presentation to the Genoa city council requesting permission to move the depot from North Sycamore Street to the Waterworks Park area. And the aldermen thought that that was a great idea and gave their unanimous support for the project. They actually had a groundbreaking May 24th, 1977. So things were moving along very quickly back then. And of course, to prepare for the move, the basement needed to be dug. And then work needed to be done on the depot itself. The chimney was removed and the skirting around the building was removed. And then Merle and his wife, Mary Jeanette Roberts, picked up all of the paving bricks that were on the platform of the depot. Those were saved so that they could be added in front of our depot once it was moved to the Waterworks location. So a professional commercial mover was hired from St. Charles, and that building was moved June 1st, 1977. So things really moved along very quickly. That professional mover charged the society $3,500 to move it, maybe a half a mile from North Sycamore Street to this location. So of course, it took quite a bit of work to prepare the depot for the actual use as a museum. Lots of interior work, finishing, pouring the basement foundation and everything. So it finally was able to open February 1982 to the public. There were some large items that had been saved through the years, and they were on exhibit immediately for the open house. There was a large rectangular oak table, and this was used for the first Farm Bureau in the country. The first Farm Bureau was started in Genoa around that oak table in 1912. And so there were 3 of the 12 founders of the Farm Bureau were from here in Genoa. So we feel that that's a really special artifact for us to have. We also have the rectangular wall clock, and that was originally hung in the Exchange State Bank of Brown and Brown. And that bank was in existence from 1882 to 1929. And then this clock later hung in the Genoa State Bank. And of course, there were lots of bank changes during the Depression. And currently we do have an exhibit showing different artifacts from the various banks in the area. So then another artifact that we're pleased to have is a Thompson piano. And it was manufactured here in Genoa in the early 1900s. And that artifact was donated to us by the Walter Knoll estate in 1982. So people have been very instrumental through the years in donating a variety of artifacts for us. Then when the depot started to fill with all of these many artifacts, the board started thinking about getting access to this waterworks building. It was the site of the original well for Genoa, and it was still being used. But in July of 1988, a 15-year lease agreement was signed with the city so that we could have access to this west portion of the waterworks building. But the lease agreement stated that the society would be responsible for pouring the concrete floor and doing tuck pointing and anything else that was needed to maintain the building, to protect the different exhibits and things that were to be housed here in this building. So you can see here that we have a wonderful collection of artifacts that were manufactured here in Genoa. We had a plant that started in 1903 that was called Eureka Electric. And they started manufacturing early telephones, crank phones, so many different interesting things. But they also did the switchboard that we have here, and they also made items that were used during the World Wars. So we have all of those on exhibit here. And through the years, there were multiple name changes. When I was growing up in the 50s and 60s, it was called Like Electric, and then the name changed to GTE Automatic Electric in 1963, and ended with the last name change to AG Communication Systems, and that name change happened in 1989. I personally do not know when that manufacturing plant closed here. Don't have that information for you, but it was a manufacturing company long-term here in Genoa. So we do have many of the items on exhibit. Another item that we have in the building is a wood hearse that is displayed on the east side of the building. And that was originally used, it was the hearse that was first drawn, first horse-drawn hearse in DeKalb County. And it was donated by Ken Cooper, whose family operated the Cooper Funeral Home in Genoa. So it's a very ornate and carved wood hearse, and it was restored by several volunteers in 1984, so it could be exhibited. I think I overlooked a statement here that we got the lease for this building in 1988, but then they started talking about the purchase of the building. The Kishwaukee Valley Heritage Society started talking about actually purchasing the building, and that was able to transpire, and the deed was recorded in 1990. So Kishwaukee Valley Heritage Society owns the depot and the waterworks building. It's all being put to good use. So now I'd like to have Rob Brown speak to the caboose that we also have on our property. And I will say that he descends from Brown and Brown. Yeah.
So I come to talk about the caboose that we have out front. And that's, that was one of my projects back in '86. We moved that caboose down there. But a little bit of backstory on railroads in Genoa. The Milwaukee Road came through in 1878, and in January, they had a big to-do. They had a picnic in January to celebrate the passenger service and everything that was going on with the railroad coming through town. In January, they had a picnic. I just find that just amazing, just amazing. On the south side of town, we have the Illinois Central Railroad, which has gone through several different names now, but it's always been treated kind of like the other place down the street because it was a mile south of town. And they came in 1888 and they built above the tracks over here, the bridge right over here. so that they didn't have a conflict with the Chicago-Milwaukee tracks. They also had I believe it was the Chicago Great Western that came from Sycamore going up towards Roscoe, and that created a little town that we were called Henrietta, and that's gone, long gone. But that track is on the right of way for the power lines over here. So, and there was some speculation that the sledding hill at Russell Woods was actually a gravel pit at one time, but it didn't last long because it was poor quality gravel and they didn't maintain it. There's a couple other places around town that were poor quality gravel pits and they didn't keep it going. But the museum bought the caboose here from the Illinois Central. One of our board members was a traveling salesman and he saw it on a sighting in Iowa. And we decided we needed to have that to represent both railroads. They bought for $2,000, shipped it to Genoa and sat on a sighting on the south side of town here by False Products for 3 or 4 years or more. And 1886, I got Jim Loomis and Glenn Zuberbear, a couple of local truck drivers, and White Brothers Trucking donated the use of their equipment. And I got a fellow named Bob Olson from the Illinois Railway Museum came down and helped us out. And we moved that caboose on the back of a flatbed truck. I've got a few pictures here in this book you can take a look at. And we hauled it down here in 1986. It was a kind of a simple process. They took a bulldozer, dug a trench, backed the trailer down into the trench. We pounded nails, literally nails, and mounted 2 rails on the back of the truck. Backed it down, winched it up onto the back of the truck off the siding, drove it down through town, and did the same thing here. Dug a trench. Hoover had already arranged to have the tracks down there. So it just dug a trench, backed it down, winched it off, and there it sits. That's where it's located. That process cost, the caboose cost us $2,000, and all we had to pay was we paid the fellow from the museum up in Union, Bob Olson was his name. He's still active up there. We paid him $100. We paid $103 to Contel Telephone and $423 to Commonwealth Edison for their people to lift wires and cables and everything as we drove it through town. That caboose it's called a 28-foot. It's actually about 40 feet from knuckle to knuckle, but it's 28 feet of space inside the caboose from front to back, and it's about 8.5 feet wide inside. It was built in 1950. There was 100 of them built between 1950 and 1951. One of those cabooses out of that series was modified in 1967 for the Atomic Energy Commission. This one was used as the milk run. So there's doors on the side where they could bring in milk cans and take them out. We haven't figured out the exact configuration of that. I don't know how the railroad would accept things like that because the railroad has such tight tolerances on the side of all their equipment. It's just amazing because I work for the railroad too. It's crazy how close they are. But so we're working on figuring out that configuration on how the milk carts or milk cans were brought in and out. The trucks on that, the axles, have what they call journal boxes, and they had what we have now what they call hot box detectors. And what they do, the hot box detectors detect heat because those journals, you can see there's a flip up lid on it, and they put any kind of junk oil they had, anything they could, and that's what lubricated the axles. Now modern cars have Temkin roller bearings, so they're a whole lot more efficient, but they don't have the hot box problems that they had, but they still have what they call hot box detectors that detect a lot of other things besides that. They monitor the whole train. They can monitor the side if things are loose on the train, if they have things falling off, falling equipment. They have the heat detector, obviously, a lot of other stuff that we don't even worry about from these hot box detectors. And they have them in different areas along the track, so they know every distance that those trains are safe to travel. So that was, this train or this caboose here was originally 9945 was the original number they had on the side of that train. And we have a picture in the caboose or in the depot of that caboose with that number from 1967. So that predates the Historical Society completely by 10 years. And I don't know where that picture came from. But in 1967 and thereafter, they started to modify them and they added 19 in front of that. So it's 199945 now, but it's that same exact caboose. It's crazy that we actually have that in the collection. What else you need to know? The cupola on the top of the caboose was for the conductor. They used to have 5 people working a train. They had the engineer, the fireman, they had a front end brakeman, they had a rear end brakeman, and they had a conductor. The conductor conducted all of his business in the caboose. He maintained where cars were set out, where they were picked up, where they were carried. They could sit in the cupola and watch the side of the train. So as the train went around the curve, they could see if there was anything falling off the train, if there was sparks flying, anything like that. That's what the purpose of the cupola was. And there was different designs. Some of them had bay windows on them, but this one has the cupola on the top. And you have to climb up there and you could step across from one side to the other. It has been repainted by the museum at least once. It originally red, a bright red color with just plain white lettering. There's one similar to it at the Trolley Museum in Elgin. That's the correct color. It's not the correct configuration. It's been modified. But this one's pretty close to its original shape and design, other than what they changed, painting, logos and things like that. And we're currently in the process of gathering information, pricing and whatnot to have it preserved. And then we're going to have to also put a roof over the top of it. We don't want to close it in on the sides, but we've got to put a roof over the top of it. We're going to spend a lot of money on preserving it. We got to protect that process. That's our caboose history. That's where my thoughts lie all the time. That I do a lot of research too. So I have this sheet here that has a lot of this specifics on the caboose, and I also have a little photo album here, pictures that we took that day of moving it down there, so you can see the trenches and who was involved and all that. So that's my presentation, and we have Christy has more that she's going to share with us.
All right, well, you can see we've been fortunate to have the volunteers that have been digging into history and keeping all of this preserved. And I like to be part of the board to look to the future. So I did notice when I joined the board that one of our missions and goals is to educate and to have field trips and offer educational opportunities to the community. And so I'm very proud that we have kept the communication with the community to find out what they actually need. And in speaking with some parents of middle school students, we found that there was kind of a gap during the 6th grade. They go to Laredo Taft for camp. And the curriculum kind of comes to a halt because half the kids are gone and they're rotating and it goes on for 3 days. So we started to question and met with the teachers about how the museum could help fill kind of a niche or a need. And they were eager to have us as part of that. And I love how when the Historical Society was here, they were talking about going back to Potawatomi, not just that, this area has historical significance because people came here in 1835. There were also people here, and it's important to talk about that history too. So also we have, tried to bring people in and as well as our students. But once our 6th grade students, we got a feel for the standards, the state standards that we wanted to help cover, the curriculum that we could help with, and what our museum had to offer. We came up with 3 areas that the museum has a lot of strengths, and that is our transportation because of the depot, the caboose, communication because we had like electric, and we have the printing presses, and then also how life was from like the late 1800s, which the North Grove School gets into, and then that transition into the 20th century. So we focused on pre-electricity and once electricity was introduced and how, those changes occurred. And so our depot is set up in, it has a small railroad section. And actually we go into the history of how it was passenger and cargo. And the kids look around and, discover, well, the depot has a lot of little answers to questions, and we get them into a lot of critical thinking. And so we do take a tour of those 3 areas. So we have the kids divided with the 6th grade comes in different groups. So different classrooms come over the course of the days that the other groups are out at camp. And then we have them meet as a large group here. And we start with a timeline that goes across the room. And we kind of zero in on some of the important things that we're going to be covering. And we pass things out, we pass some of the items out that are on the timeline to students. And then we give little hints and have them come up when they realize that they're holding that particular card. And we talk about how our timeline kind of starts in 1835, 1836, but also if it actually went back to the length of time that people were living here, it would go for blocks and blocks, because there have been people here for thousands of years and we're just covering 100 years or so. So we have volunteers that come and help on that day, and one volunteer is a former teacher. He talks to the kids in the caboose and gets into the history of our railroad here in Genoa and how that affected life here. And then also really getting into the caboose and its parts, and the kids get to hold things and manipulate things and answer, how do you think this was used? And so we try to have it as hands-on as possible. And then the kids rotate. We have an old school bell out on the blacktop. My husband rings it every 20 minutes and everybody moves. And so then the kids also come to this room, and we mainly talk about communication in Genoa. And, it got us thinking too, how I remember my dad used to, set up type in a small town in Missouri, and how so many small communities and towns had their own newspaper. We don't have that now. And so the kids learn about the different newspapers we've had in Genoa. They actually use the printing press and they print something before they go. And then the third part of their rotation, and these are 6th graders, they come to the depot, and we talk about how we first go to the general store that we have set up. So we have a general store area, we have a kitchen area, we have a bedroom area and a parlor area, and then kind of where that original table was, that was part of the Farm Bureau. But when we get to the, I'm a former teacher, and so I like to bring in the local history as well as kind of make it connect to whatever it is that they are learning in school. And so we stand in front of this general store and talk about, how people would only shop once a month, or, what a great distance it might have been, and, the items that were pretty much dry goods, and we talk about why it's called a dry goods store. And I also bring in some of our Illinois history where I say, do you know there was a president of the United States that was once, he kept a shop, a general store, and they guess Bush, Clinton, Washington. And so then I give them a few hints, and we also have a bust of Lincoln. And so it's just great to, I know it's memorable for them to come to a local museum and really have that history that we all share, and that it's important for them to, feel proud that they get that here. And we do talk about the issue of the Civil War. We have a Civil War, we have a mannequin that's dressed in the Civil War, and we are very mindful of the fact that this is Genoa Kingston schools. So we do talk about how, Genoa sent 105 or so Union soldiers, and Kingston sent like 101. So, we talk about both the communities and try to be mindful of that. But we get into, we actually have the kids hold an artifact, and one of them is an old vacuum cleaner. They have no idea that that's what that does. It's heavy, it's bulky. They start pumping it and it's blowing air out everywhere. And so it's not easy to guess that actually helped you clean. But and then we get to the kitchen area, and the kids are looking around for, can you find the refrigerator? And it's an old wooden ice box, and they're pointing to, a wooden, a metal box that's a bread box, or this cabinet. And so it just really opens their eyes to how people lived in the past, and what we kind of expect today. So we get into a little bit about energy, and that's an important topic in their science and history. And so we talk about that in terms of this kitchen in this spot. And then at the end, we crank up the Victrola and talk about how, without electricity, how did people entertain themselves? How did they, spend their evenings? And so it really gets their imaginations going, and they've written, adoring thank you notes over the years. And so we've been doing this for 6 years until we had to stop for the pandemic. Just before the pandemic, we started with second grade, and they come in and learn about artifacts. And then they do diagrams of them while they're here. And, we have discussions, and then they go back and they do a teaching session in their classrooms with what they learned from the museum. That's been very well received. Unfortunately, we got that going just before we had to put it on pause. And then we are waiting to initiate our last coordination with the Genoa Kingston School District, and that is with fourth grade. We have done the research within our museum, but also with the state, isn't it? Illinois State University Library or newspapers?
Oh, University of Illinois.
University of Illinois, where they have, where we can find a lot of research about what happened in Genoa, thanks to the Sycamore True Republican paper. And then now, very recently, we have more of the local newspapers available digitally at our Genoa library. And I haven't checked that out yet. It's been very recently put together, but we have used information to do research on 6 buildings around Genoa. And we've tried to cover manufacturing, banking, and culture. So we have an old opera house building, and we've used the Electric building, Genoa Bank, the piano factory, Pacific Hotel, and a department, kind of a store downtown that was used for a hospital, and it really went through a lot of evolution. So with those 6 buildings now, we'll take packets into fourth grade classrooms, and do a little presentation. We'll do some modeling, and then the students will become experts in small groups on one of those buildings. And then they will do a tour downtown. And we hope to invite dignitaries like our alder people, our mayor, perhaps some of the store owners, and have the kids actually present to them the information that they have learned. So yeah, so if you get a chance when this ends, there's a great, you can kind of do that tour I talked about in the depot. I think is our caboose open today? Yes. So, and then there's some great things here with the communication we didn't get into, but hopefully a lot of it will be learning, and we thank you for coming today.
Oh, great.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you all. I think this is just so fun, just to learn about what everybody else is doing. And I know that one of the things that we're working on in the History Center, I know you might both probably work with Carol, is to create a resource for teachers throughout the county of what educational materials are out there, because it's amazing work that's being done. And I know teachers are looking for resources all the time so that we can get the word out about these treasures here. This is going to be wonderful. So yeah, a lot of things were put on pause, but a lot of energy moving forward and just getting that excitement going again. So thank you all so much. If you just want to visit our website, that'll list the future programs. But this was the first of 3 that we're going to do about spotlighting different museums in DeKalb County. So the next one will be for Central, and that will include those museums, and then we'll also have one down in the southern part of the county as well. So lots of field trips, but then programs between the History Center and the Elwood House. And then I think we end the year on the December program will be all virtual, just because the speakers from out of town. So lots of different places to go and things to see. So we're excited though to having in-person programming again. So thank you all again so much. I learned a lot. So thank you again.